live all during that conversation? I don't think.
No, we weren't. Now we're live again.
Okay. I don't see the live button in my corner here. For some
It's up on the top right or bottom right, depending on your screen.
Yeah, I still don't see it, but okay. Oh, now I see it. Okay. Welcome, Megan. I think where we left off was I think you had gone through most of the major concerns and your response to them, but you had sent to the committee a chart of, I guess, more minor technical concerns, or I don't know if that's a fair statement of them, but I was wondering if you could pull those up and walk us through those, and we'd be further along and towards a final version of this bill.
Absolutely. Good morning. For the record, Megan Sullivan, Executive Director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council. So the memo that I sent to the committee was, as requested, amendments to the language as it is currently in the bill, and then sort of an assessment of some of the concerns and suggestions that other witnesses had made. So we went through some of those amendments. I realized one thing that I left out, though, was the request from the Regional Planning Commission to include the neighborhood planning zones, that quarter-mile bubble outside of the district designation that would allow communities to capture potential housing development projects and public infrastructure projects that are needed to support those, which we're on board with, and just made the point that those may have a few additional permitting requirements because they're not in that designated area that a community would go through, but that the permitting is a bit outside of TIF. So in terms of whether or not those public infrastructure projects, though, should be included, we're supportive of that.
It would be helpful if we can pull up that handout you sent us. Can you do that?
I do that.
Is it on our website? It
Yes.
should be under Megan's name. It must be under witnesses, isn't it?
If you
Is that sharing? No.
Oh, are you going to share? I think
Oh,
does Nathan need to give you ability to share?
I think I just took it.
Oh, there you
I'm
there you
very
are.
bold.
Can you make it a tiny bit bigger or not? Oh, good.
How's that? Better?
Better. Yeah, I guess.
Here we go. So in terms of the amendments, I'll just quickly go through these. We talked about coordinating agency. You know, while we think that using a coordinating agency is already covered in the idea in the definition of related cost, an importance in just really spelling out that coordinating agency is an allowable related cost expense. So this is working with the RPC or the RDC on that application administration process. Financing, including the use of bans. I know I had sent out an FAQ about what bans were. Bans are not disallowed in TIF. The question is really, can you count ban as your first incurrence of debt? So this is about allowing it to be included.
Didn't we have this debate at length with the auditor and finance, and was that the result we did for districts as well?
No, I think that was about the use of a debt service reserve fund. The auditor's office, as far as I'm aware, is not unsupportive of bans. I mean, again, bans are a very typical part of municipal financing, and how they incur their debt before they start a project, before they get to go to the bond bank because of timing and a variety of issues. But it's really not about a controversial use of ban. It's just whether or not it can be considered that incurrence of debt.
Okay.
We do probably differ from the state auditor's office on the use of debt service reserve funds, which we think is important for the district program, but also very important for this project based TIF, as you know, these communities are even less likely to have the reserves that they would need to pay debt service during those years before the private development comes online. So, you know, typically you'll see the public development start and then the private development. So there could be, you know, a 2 or 3 year period when the municipality needs to use something like a debt service reserve fund to make some of those payments until that increment is available.
So this was the issue you talked about in finance last year or the year before.
Yes.
And it was a legal fight in some ways, and we resolved it along these lines.
The bill that left finance resolved it along these lines. That bill did not make it through, unfortunately. So this matter is still very much in uncertainty for TIF districts, for VEPC. It's challenging to have it unresolved. But this is how it left finance last year.
Right. So I don't want to get bogged down in this, but are we in any way, approving, if this went all the way through, I don't know that it would have, is there a court case pending?
No. No.
Okay, this is the way you're interpreting it now, and
This would not change the ambiguity that still resides in the TIF district program.
Okay, and this is the way the Senate Finance
The
Committee.
Senate Finance bill to provide the clarification that is very much needed included the use of debt service reserve funds for communities, I think for the first 5 or 6 years of their district.
Did that go through the Senate, or where did it go after it left Finance?
I believe it was on the Senate floor, but never got a third reading.
Okay. All right, let's move on.
Sure. So the definition of project, you know, hearing from the regional development corporations, talking more about what's included in the project. We're looking at changing the definition to make sure that it's not just a single improvement, but that there are improvements that are, we use the word contiguous here, but it could be, you know, more appropriate to say interrelated or integral to one another. So this is the, you know, you're laying the wastewater pipe to go into the downtown and you have to rip up the road. You can also repave the road. That if you're doing a streetscape project, that you can do sidewalks and lighting, that it would not be interpreted by someone to say, well, your improvement was this one light, there you put in 10 lights, those can't be covered. So to make it really, to make this work for communities, there may be a few different types of improvements. We don't want this to get out of hand where someone is trying to do a TIF district under this project-based TIF program. So they need to be interrelated or integral to that that redevelopment. And then the removal of the cap, which we've talked about at length. At least, you know, and we've, I think last time we talked about at least raising that cap. The definition of TIF project zone, which the state auditor's office had suggested, and we think that's a great idea, to sort of identify that the zone is the properties that have nexus to the project that's going on. These are the anticipated redevelopments. So talk a little bit about the neighborhood planning zone. The definition of industrial parks. So, we think of this as an economic development program and a community development program. And so using a definition that comes from another economic development program like VITA is more appropriate than using a permitting process. Permitting process will still have to be followed for towns that are using this designation. And one concern that comes to my mind is, if a community is creating either adding a street or adding amenities to an industrial zone, if they had a childcare facility, which is, a wonderful amenity to have in a industrial park for the workforce there, and just for the space that it creates for a facility like that, does that Act 250 definition prohibit something like that, or prohibit a enhancement of that park if something like childcare is there, or if there's a brewery there that also has a tasting room, can we not then also enhance that industrial park to make way for additional industrial uses? So, our stance is that the current definition is the appropriate definition to have for an economic development program.
Can we talk about this one? I know we probably have before. I mean, most of the TIFs that have TIF districts have not been in industrial parks. Is that correct?
So I think the examples would be the first TIF district, which actually resembles more of a project-based TIF, which was in Newport, and that was in their industrial area, as well as the Milton North South, which included the Husky facility and the Catamount Industrial Park.
So this issue, at least in the House, has some controversy, as you know, any kind of expansion. And, this committee is focused on economic development and housing. The examples we mostly heard of so far for the mini TIFs have been like the Westford example. Right. I guess I want to have a discussion of narrowing this to delete industrial parks altogether, and just, to the extent we're doing expansion here, not bite off more than we can chew. So I'd like to hear your response to that.
Yeah, I think industrial parks are an important piece of our economic development landscape. There are high-paying jobs that come from manufacturing and industry that communities don't have a space. There isn't current space available. I think Fred Kenny testified to that from the RDC, is that there isn't a lot of current space available, but we want to encourage this type of growth in our entrepreneurial businesses in the state, to be able to create these type of jobs that often offer wages and benefits that are really beneficial to Vermont's workforce. And those are businesses that we don't necessarily want to see in our designated downtowns or in our greenfields. You don't want a meat processing plant next to your elementary school, or big trucks that are driving through the middle of downtown. So we strongly believe that industrial parks should be included in this, because there are, like in our designated downtowns, there's important public infrastructure amenities that are needed to make these sites viable for industry to grow there.
Do you agree with my assessment, whether it's political or not, that if we view this as a pilot expansion, that there may be some advantages to starting out narrower than broader?
Well, I think as a pilot, being able to see how it works in different ways could could be helpful. I know, spoken with one town who does have an opportunity that's also in an opportunity zone with a industrial park that I think would be interested in trying to participate in this program if it were to pass. So, again, it's up to the committee, obviously, but our preference would be that industrial park stay as an eligible use of this pilot, and that the current definition is the one that's used.
Just here,
Mr. Chair.
let me, second, Senator Clarkson, we continually hear about, the expensive cost of infill housing and how much less expensive it is to build in a greenfield, and that we need to consider that kind of element of smart growth. I'm, we'll have a discussion about it, but the concern that if we, say, well, we're doing tax incremental financing and we're potentially rating the education fund for building a factory out in a greenfield, it just doesn't seem as sellable to the House as it might otherwise be. But Senator Clarkson.
I was just going to say that some of these industrial parks are actually located with some close proximity to some of our downtowns. I'm thinking, I just don't know that many of them, but there are some in White River Junction and in Springfield that are reasonably close to the downtowns and have been co-located for all sorts of reasons. And so I would be reluctant to see this disappear, although it does. Anyway, so I guess I would support keeping the industrial parks in for the moment, but we might want to say within a certain proximity of a downtown, because I don't think this is. I wouldn't want to see many TIFs going out to industrial parks that are, have no relation to their downtown and are not in some ways solving some of the downtown, challenge of having some of these things actually right downtown.
That may be a compromise. Okay, let's move on.
Great. So the approval process, this is a new section that in the amendment version that you have from Becky, that just outlines more of the approval process, including the plan, but for and viability of BEPC's responsibilities. And the suggestion that was made for the authorizing vote to be an authorizing vote that's passed by a majority of the voters. So if the vote fails, that doesn't eliminate the town's ability to go back, with just the caveat of understanding that if it fails and they go back, they may not, and it doesn't eventually move forward. VEPC may not have time to, approve another community if one doesn't happen. But agree that making that clarification, that's the intent, that you have one authorizing vote that actually passes.
This came from Burke and White,
Yeah.
and or White and Burke, whatever.
White and Burke, yeah.
So you're saying that if we buy into what they were saying, it might, and we have a limited number of projects a year that could be approved, that we may be holding back a more viable project while this one waits for a second vote that could fail again. Is that what you're saying?
I think there's that potential. But if we, as we discussed a little bit the last time I was in, if we are increasing the number from 6 to 10 to 15, then we have the ability to help more communities. If there's only 6, And one out of those 6 runs into issues with getting something passed. I think that's harder. But if we've got more slots available, I think this is less of an issue.
Yeah, and just so the committee understands, I mean, I'm in favor of doing more rather than less. I think Senator Brock is as well, and I'm not sure why it got bogged down in finance, but when this bill goes to finance, I'm sure we'll be having those discussions in terms of the number of allowable projects in any given year, the number of years in this pilot project, and the size of the allowable projects. So, but I think at least one member of this committee, I would like to start at the higher end, and if it gets pared down, which it probably will throughout the process, at least we're not starting too low.
Agreed.
Mr. Chair, can I ask Megan, I can't remember if there's an upper limit for larger TIFs, the actual big TIFs, and
There
what is
is. So that
that?
passed in 2017 that allowed 6 more TIF districts to be approved. Of those 6 TIF districts, 2 of the slots have been taken. That's Bennington and Montpelier. So that was what created some of the confusion around those. Have been added to this bill to make it clear that those communities can't get a project. But then that leads to needing to update the other statutory language to say that now instead of BEPC authorizing 6 additional, it's just there's 4 additional that can be authorized. That wasn't an intentional switch to add 2 more to BEPC's. How many can be authorized by BEPC? It was just.
And do they have a dollar amount that
There's no dollar amount. There's no ceiling on the TIF district program.
Yeah, so I feel like that helps create the argument that like 6 of these could still be less than one of the larger ones, and so
right.
Why sort of severely limit these when we're not for the bigger towns and cities?
Right, correct. Okay, let's keep going, and we'll get to the.
And then just the last piece was that there's section O, policies are consistent with TIF rule. Just a small update that there's a draft of an update rule that's been in process. There is hope that we can, we're currently getting feedback on the latest draft. The hope is that we can get that started through the rulemaking process. So rather than saying just the 2015 rule, it would be any other adopted rules that would come after that. The next part was an assessment of concerns and comments. We were able to read through the state auditor's memo and agree largely with it. That first piece being the number of districts needing to be updated, I believe in 32, since we are adding Bennington and Montpelier to the list. And I believe Becky has done that. Use the clear date for the OTV. Absolutely agree. Putting in April 1st, that's the grand list year, makes sense, and we should do that. One proposal we were making is to make that when the OTV, that's the original taxable value, so the sort of that baseline, this is what the education fund and the municipality will continue to get for property tax. Having that set the year that the voters approve incurring debt, rather than when the municipality adopts the TIF plan or VEPC's approval. And I think this just allows them to have that original taxable value set closer to the time that the project is actually going to start. I know some towns have seen a decrease in their grand list, so setting it early on and then maybe not starting the project for another 5 years could mean that they're already in the hole.
Does this apply to the districts as well?
No, the districts it's set at the time that the plan is approved by the municipality.
Why wouldn't we track what the districts do?
We could. I think it makes it, for again, just for our small communities, it makes it even harder to think about how to make up that decrement. When we're talking about gap financing, we're talking about a lesser amount of increment that's going to be available.
Okay. I think I have to understand that. I mean, if you assume, um, if you assume property tax values are going to increase over years and you set it at the time the plan is first submitted versus the time the vote goes through, the original tax value presumably would be higher at the time the vote goes through. Does that put more potential pressure on the ed fund or less?
That gives the communities a padding of increment that wasn't generated from the project if it's going up. Now we have, we'll have some communities that it might be going up slightly, but we'll also have some communities that it may be going down slightly. So pushing that, the date of setting the OTV, I think is a better reflection of what the original taxable value is prior to the project starting.
Okay. Should we, not that we're going to do it now, but should we make that change for the districts as well?
I think it's something worth discussing for the districts as well. We'd love to see that clarification bill come back. It would just be for those 4 additional districts that we would be, looking at approving. But I think it's worth having that conversation.
Okay. Okay. Why don't we wait till we get a new district?
The calculation that the calculation should, how it's calculated should be in this bill. The bill already shows that policies from the TIF rule would carry over to this as well. So we don't really see the need for adding that language here. We've already set out that those types of policies, the rule is in place to add detail. So it's already there. The bill already provides for that. So we don't think that's necessary.
So you're saying the auditor is saying the calculation should be in rule, and you're saying it's somewhere that has the effect of law already?
I think they were saying that the calculation is in the rule and it should be in this bill. It should be in S33 since it's in the TIF districts have to abide by it because it's in the rule. So it should be in this bill so that project-based TIFs have to abide by it. Our point is that this bill already provides for policies being created from the existing TIF rule. So it's not necessary to add this to the bill since it's already in the rule, which will apply to the project-based TIF.
Okay, well,
we don't have anything wrong with the calculation of how tax increment is calculated. We certainly agree with that process. It just seems unnecessary to add it there since it's already in the rule, which will be applicable to the projects.
well, we'll defer to our counsel on that one to
Sure.
whether that's necessary as belts and suspenders.
Talking about having the application requirements in terms of the extension of the debt borrowing period. So this is an update to the plan, but they pointed out that there wasn't a section about the plan, so that's been added, that the section about what the TIF plan will include. So we agreed with that, and the suggested language is in the amendment. In terms of the annual report, talked about using consistent terminology, and this is where they came up with the term TIF project zone, which we agree with. It's a great term, TIF project zone, and agree that consistent terminology is important.
Okay.
From testimony and other memos, We would disagree that St. Albans is the only TIF district that has used has made debt service payments with debt proceeds, as that memo stated, and that the availability of this type of tool is important to cover the debt costs in the years when increment isn't available.
Now that we're back on debt service reserve funds,
Sure.
can you explain that to me as, do they still need permission from the treasurer or someone to access this reserve fund, or are they automatically granted permission?
The reserve fund would come from, so they would take out either extra debt to cover the debt in the early years, or would use some of the money they took out for a project to cover the debt and then repay that to be used for projects.
So they could, in the beginning, just take on additional debt than what they say they need for the project as a reserve and
use that additional debt as a reserve to be making those payments. Now they'll still have to repay all of the money that they borrowed. So they're paying for that, but it allows them in those early years, especially again for the small communities that may not have other funds that they can borrow from to make that debt service. I think the example of Hartford is, Hartford, if a community doesn't do their project right away, they may have additional time that they are getting increment, not from projects, but from, that small increase in grand list that can be used for that. But the idea of project-based TIF is you don't get it, and for districts that you don't get that, set the OTV and then sit on this. It's that you're getting to it and getting these projects done.
So are we complicating things here? Is this a comment from the auditor?
Yes.
Okay, so this has been a very controversial issue, a legal issue in the St. Albans. There's been some acrimony on this. Given that there is the tool of what do you call BAN? What are they called? Early financing, bridge financing. Do we have to open this door again right now? As the auditor says, it's not settled yet in the district program. Why are we inviting it here? Do we absolutely need this? I mean, I can see both sides of the arguments on this. And then you had a memo on bridge financing that seems to be available to towns. Why can't we just leave it at that?
Again, I think the bans are still going to require the funds to make those payments back, and it's about making the debt service payments, not about taking these funds out and using the increment to make debt service payments. So, I would love to have this discussion about the larger TIF district program. I certainly hope that opportunity comes up in this legislative session, and that if it is settled in the TIF district program, that we can include it in this program as well. But do you think it's an important conversation that should be had, and I think will affect smaller communities even more.
Happy to have the conversation. I just wish the two could track, and it seems like this is very much up in the air, but what's being suggested in this bill is that we go with the interpretation that ACCD or VEPSI wants to give to it, and not to the interpretation that the auditor wants to give to it. I agree, we should have the conversation, but until we have that conversation, is it terribly detrimental to this bill going forward? I always try and look at the landscape down the road and getting to the finish line. As my father always would say, who needs this aggravation?
Yes.
So, I mean, could we just be silent or kick the can down the road or go with the auditor's version as of now without grossly interfering with people's interest or ability to make these projects go? Or is this really critical?
I think it's critical to get resolved one way or the other. I think the auditor's office and Betsy and are in disagreement of whether or not this is already disallowed. We do not believe it is disallowed. It is nowhere in the TIF district statute does it say it is disallowed. And I believe Senator Cummings had said she was there when these were written, and there was no legislative intent to not allow this. So, if the bill is silent on it, I think that is a better outcome than not saying anything. But again, that it does need to be resolved.
The bill is probably silent on it right now, right?
Right now, it is included.
Oh, it is included. Okay.
Yes.
So I don't think I was here for the controversy. Maybe that came up in the committees and on the floor. So I'm still just trying to understand what it is so I can understand why it's controversial. But what I'm hearing, what it sounds like is like when you go to buy a house and you ask for a little bit more money than you need to buy the house because you're just sort of worried about your cash flow in the beginning of making a huge purchase. And so you say to the bank, hey, I know this is the value of the house, but I think I need this much to sort of help with all the other miscellaneous costs and get this going. But you still spell it out. Is that kind of what we're talking about here? Or is this a whole separate fund that everyone's drawing from?
No, the fund would only be able, the only allowable use of the fund would be to use. So it'd be like your example, except you're using that bit of money to make your mortgage payments until the other funds that you need to make those payments become available.
So you just like depleted all your savings and you're like, I can't make those first 6 payments without that original cash in the beginning because now
you've created a commercial business, you've taken out your commercial loan, you don't have the money to make your commercial loan payments yet because you haven't been making sales yet. You're using some of that extra funds to make those payments, and once your sales are coming in, then you can make that up.
It's your fit up. And the controversy, what is the controversy that is, has someone kind of defaulted? It's because that they did that yet so far?
That there was an opinion during a audit of the St. Albans TIF district where the city did use this financing tool for their district. The state auditor's office asked for an opinion or a memo from the Attorney General. The Attorney General said, based on this statute, this isn't allowable. ACCD said there are 2 statutes that govern TIF. You need to look at the second statute as well as the first in conjunction to understand why these are why this would be seen as allowable. And asked for a follow-up. We did not receive a follow-up from the Attorney General's office, and it is VEPC's responsibility to rule. So using the opinion by our general counsel that looked at both statutes, we said that was an allowable use of in TIF, and the Joint Fiscal Committee said that the legislature needed to weigh in on this and asked us BEPC to hold off on any future rulings so the legislature could weigh in, and we are waiting for that action.
So is there a question at all about St. Albans not articulating that they were taking on extra debt to have in reserve?
I think that is part of for St. Albans, though there, we know of at least one other TIF district who's done this, who did articulate.
Okay.
That they would have a fund.
So there is some, I'm not, this is still siding, coming down on one side, but there is possibly the ability to say, we're asking these municipalities to articulate that they're keeping a debt reserve fund and make sure it's only appropriated for TIF repayment or something.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely appropriate.
But and again, that would still be saying that's still us saying that's an allowable use, but we're putting more
parameters. And that's still the bigger question of clearly defining that is an allowable use, though it was not clearly defined that it was not allowable use.
Is there like a percentage that they're allowed? Is there a cap on how much they're allowed to ask for as a reserve?
I don't believe there was a cap for how much. I think it was more about the years that you could do that, because at some point the increment really is the key. Is that increment is making these debt service payments.
Right.
So let me make a suggestion here. Senator Rahm is definitely right to ask these questions. She's going to be reporting this bill, but I think we may want to, on this particular issue, given that finance has spent a lot of time on it already, and this bill is going to finance, I think we should remain silent on this in our bill, and Senator Brock and I will raise the issue, as I'm sure Megan will, when the bill gets to finance, and let's not have two committees arguing about what is a fairly narrow, esoteric kind of part of the bill. I could be wrong, but I think in the scheme of the project, whether or not this gets resolved in St. Albans' favor generically, or the position that the auditor has taken is not going to spell the death knell of every project coming forward. So if that's okay with others, I'd like to get finished with this chart, at least today. I think we're going to
yeah, because we have
right,
witnesses waiting.
Yep.
All right. So the 1.5 debt ceiling being small, we agree that is too small and think that it should be removed. I'm not sure that was removing it was exactly what the state auditor's office was suggesting, but that's what we would say, and that allowing viability and nexus to be limiting factors.
Megan, can you hear me? Megan, can you hear me?
Yep.
I don't know why. It seems like people can't hear me very well. Do you think you could finish this up in 5 minutes? If not,
I can. I'm going to fly through it. Grant programs, I think, one-time grants are great for communities that have shovel-ready projects. They're not great for communities that are trying to get planning these projects that are necessary. They don't necessarily create the same level of community buy-in that TIF does, or the level of private development buy-in that TIF mandates, because the private development has to come along to create the increment. So it really is a public-private partnership. And loans, there are loans available. There's money out there. It's the ability to repay that money, to leverage those funds that TIF really speaks to. And it's about creating an equitable program that our regional hubs have access to, and allowing our rural communities to have a similar access to something like this. That the increment may not align with projections. This came from Graham Campbell. This is, sort of the broader possibility with TIF in general, not just Vermont. But I think when you're talking about project-based TIF, you're doing one project rather than lots of projects over 10 years. The timing is much, in terms of when it's approved, when you're moving forward, is more in control. The Council of Development Finance Agencies has done a lot of work on best practices in TIF. And when they're talking about project specific TIF, they say it's, these are less complicated transactions with the cleaner process because fewer parties are involved. You have less landowners, less private developers, and less projects. TIF is complicated with legislative action. That's true, but ACCD has worked really hard to make this program less complicated. And working with technical assistance organizations, I think is going to, like the RPCs and the RDCs, is going to help make this a lot easier for communities to apply for and administer. Recessions can have an impact on building projects and cash flow. I think we can't let the existence of economic cycles allow us to leave rural communities behind. Finding ways to support them through economic cycles in order to see that type of downtown development, economic development that's important to them is part of our role in the state. And that by using property tax, which tends to be more stable than things like sales tax for TIF in Vermont, sort of allows for some of that, or helps control some of that risk from a recession in terms of the increment coming in. Districts in 10 years that have 10 years to build, I think you can see more of that effect of the economic cycle. Capacity issue for small towns. Again, we're working with technical assistance providers to help on that and to really be partners with our communities so that they can do this and have simplified the program with them in mind.
We could pass by the next one. Go ahead.
Okay. Fred Kenny talked
real quick.
Yep, Fred talked about multiple improvements. We discussed that and agree with it. He also asked that the bill keep industrial areas as currently defined, which we agree with. Neighborhood planning areas, agree with that. And Stephanie Clark spoke about the one vote. Again, agree with changing that to make it one successful vote. And then we've talked about the definition of industrial parks that Kate McCarthy brought up.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to rush you. We have witnesses waiting.
No worries.
So thank you. I want to try and squeeze this in for follow-up tomorrow. We have a little bit of extra time to be determined. I'm hopeful you're available tomorrow morning. Work with Nathan to let him know your schedule. Okay, Megan?
Okay, will do. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Senator Cluckton has
Do
been.
you want to take a 1 minute break?
Let's take a 5-minute break, and then you can lead us in the discussion of S79. Okay.
Okay. Happy to do so. See you.